Hi, I'm Fabrice Harari. Welcome to WinDevCon 2007 Tables and Loopers course. First, why do we talk of both at the same time, tables and loopers? Because they are basically the same tool. In fact, historically it looks like the loopers are PCSoft answer to many display requests made on tables. I would like to be able to create a table with several fields, one above each other for each row, and so on and so forth. As it was obviously not possible to do that in a regular table, their solution was to introduce this new field, the looper, which is underlying a table. It's to the point where you can transform a table in a looper in one click. If you go in WinDev, you have that possibility the same way that you can transform a radio button into a selector and this kind of thing. Let's have a quick look. In this window you have two tables with different styles, right? Well, in fact, no. The upper one is a table, the lower one is a looper with its style built to look like a table, and that's it. But this is in fact a looper. You can see that even the scroll bar has the same characteristic that the one in a table. It's really similar. So, what to use? A table or a looper? Once you know if you want to use a table or a looper, are you going to use one that is working directly on a file, on a query, or directly in memory? If it's on a query, are you going to use an embedded query, an external query, or even a SQL hand-coded query? And if you use a memory object where you code yourself the data access, are you going to use SQL code or H commands? Well, the answer is you're going to use all of that at one point or another for one reason or another. The real question is when to use what, and that's what we're going to look at in the next hour or so. What reason could you have to choose one option or another one? So, which one are you going to choose? The functionalities are basically the same. Of course, there are small differences. For example, in table, you have the table headers where you can sort and search. So, if you're looking for a selector, table is probably your best bet. But you could achieve the same thing in a looper. You would have to code a little bit, but just changing the source of data for a query that is sorted on this or that would do the trick for the sort. Same thing for the selector. It's very easy. So you could basically use both of them. It's just more immediate to use the table for this kind of thing, but if the look is more important, then it's something else. So basically the main difference between these two objects is in fact the way data is displayed. Remember that you can change from a table to a looper directly in the WinDev editor. You just go in the field menu and you switch from table to looper. But you cannot change from looper to table. So if you start with a table and you want to switch to a looper, it's very easy. In the other direction, no such luck, you will have to redo the object. But you can make a looper look like a table, as I showed you before. It's perfectly possible. It's more a question of style than anything else. You cannot really make a table look like a looper because you won't be able to put several fields on above each other. So it's really for me more a UI decision than anything else. the best way to go is probably to ask yourself, okay, what do I really need? Do I really need to have functionality like sorting and searching on value available immediately without any coding? So that's a table. If that's not really the point, if it's really a question of displaying information, well, in that case, you have both choices. And it's remember this possibility to change from one to the other. You can start with the table, it's simpler, and if the user need something, it tells you I need this or that, this way, that way, well, you can switch to the looper to have a more advanced display. Let's now see how you're going to fill your tables or looper. We already saw that we use both of them for most of the things. It's really a UI preference. So, are you going to use them linked to a file, linked to a query, or as a memory object that you're going to fill yourself? Let's see the pros and cons of each one. For the file, it's extremely fast. When there's no filtering, it's direct access, only the recorded are displayed in the object. So your 10 line or so are loaded in memory. So it's an extremely efficient way to get to the data. It can be used as a native record selector. You just plug a table on a file, you put that in your window, and you have it to select record and double click on it and open the corresponding form or anything like that. It's a technique that is used in the RAD and that you can use yourself as a selector. Of course, you can build the selector yourself, but it's a very quick and efficient way to do one. It can be sorted and searched on all keys. So if you want to add the possibility for the user to sort or search on another key, you can do that by just adding a key on that. It's in the file. It's very easy. Of course, it has the potential to overload your server. If you have a file that is 2 million record big and the user drag the scroll bar the whole way, he will go through your 2 million records, and he will do that as 2 million record read on the server, and it will go through your network. So obviously, yes, it's extremely powerful. Sometimes it can be a little too much powerful for your own good. Even when a table is linked to a file, you can code directly the access. It's a functionality that is not very well known, but it can allow you to do a very nice thing while still being linked to a file. Let's have a look. So let's look at that table. That table is basically linked currently to a file. The content is the test big file, and that's it. There's nothing, absolutely no programming done in all that. Now let's have a look how it works. So if I just do a go on the table, I have absolutely nothing coded, and well, it's going through all the record without any problem. It's extremely fast, efficient, and so on. But you can change things and do things your way in that linked to a file table just by checking program browse. In that case, the search item and the ascending and descending order are not there anymore, and if we test the table now, you see that there's no link to the test that. Okay, we have an error. It's normal. No code found in read first record process. so couldn't access the data, and it's not normal for a file table. So what do you have to do in that? Well, you go in the table code, and here you're going to do what you have to do in all this different code. In the read first record of table test big, by example, we're going to do h read first, and you can see we can do that on the query too, so it's very easy to do the same thing in case of query. Test big on the label key, that's it. On the read previous, we're going to do a h read previous, test big label. On the read next, h read next, test big label. And on the read last, h read last, test big label. Now in the table initialization we can also do a h deactivate filter test big. This way we are sure that we'll have the whole file, and that's it. Now if we had absolutely no let's just check if it works correctly. Oh, sorry, made a mistake somewhere. Oh yeah, one more. Sometimes automatic completion and me are competing to put closing parentheses. So now we have the code that is working about the same way. As you can see, it's we have this now scroll bar behaving differently because, well, it's not the built-in code of the table working, but our code that is called, so it's not behaving exactly the same way. But except for that, we have this exact content, and we can do a strange thing, like, by example, we're going to do on h read next only. While test big dot comment. Sorry, that's a double one that I need here. Okay. So what I did here is simply tell the table when I'm going down to avoid all record with a 9 in it. Let's have a look. You don't see really a difference at this point. No 9 anywhere. But now if I'm going previous, now suddenly I have records with 9. So you see that by just coding itself I can do all the crazy stuff that your user are going to ask you to do, and that wouldn't be possible by just linking the table to the file. Of course, if a user asks you to remove all the record containing a 9 when it goes down in the table but not when it goes up, you should ask for the payment beforehand. But that's just me. So, of course, it's also unpluggable, which means that with the .browsed file property, you can at any point say that the browsed file of the table is nothing, is another file. It can be very useful if you are, by example, using several files with the exact same structure with aliases. Or it could be also from one file to a query, to another query, to another one, just by one line of code. You say my table .browsed file is the name of the query that is doing this crazy thing that the user wants when clicking on that button, and you're done. It's extremely powerful, and curiously, lots of people don't know that they have this possibility. Now let's see what happens when you're working with a query. Well, the speed obviously depends of the query optimization, as we saw in the HF versus SQL and optimization courses. The result can be extremely fast or extremely slow. Now, suddenly, the choice of proportional scroll bar or not is very important. Perhaps some of you follow the thread that went on Parsimony some time ago, where I was talking about that particular point. The scroll bar options, proportional or not, it's very simple to understand. If you want a proportional scroll bar, you need to know how many records displayed in the table or can be displayed in the table. So currently, if you're working on a whole file, well, they know how many records there are in the files, so they don't have to read them in order to know that. Now, if you're working on a query, you don't know beforehand how many records are going to be returned by your query. So you're going to need to read all your record from the data set in order to know how many records there are and calculate the size of the scroll bar. So just in order to have this wonderful proportional scroll bar, you suddenly have to preload all your data, all your record before you can work, which means that you lose the advantage on working on a query, and you could as well work directly in a memory table and load everything at once. So be careful, it's extremely important. Another problem with the query is that if the query is slow, if it's not optimized, and that can happen a lot if you're allowing your user to design the query that it needs himself. Well, if the query is slow, there is no stopping possible. The user has to wait till the end of the query. Let's have a look what it does. If you do a query in the table I have here in my example, command starts with com, and you can see that in fact all the commands start with com. So it's basically the whole file. I'm going to go to the automatic browse again. This way you see all the commands here, they start with com. It's command 1 to 50,000. So basically I want everything, but the problem is that I don't have a key on that column. But if I'm using as a data source instead of the browse file an embedded query, and I already created that, then what happened? Let's see. As you can see, there's nothing displayed here, and there's a reason for that. Let's try. Why is the window not appearing? Well, it's because my file is a 400,000 record file, and the query has to go through each and every record in order to find out if it's matching the condition. So I'm going to stop that. Move that query that is absolutely ugly. I'm sure you agree with me. That's it. Now if I run my window, okay, it's instantaneous. So when you have a user complaining, well, I don't understand, when I try to open the window it takes forever and so on, well, there's a very good reason, and that can happen very, very fast with the query. You can see that this query is not even a very complex one. It's just a field starts with. So if you have a key on that one, it's going to be fast. If you don't, by example, it's a memo field or something like that, well, it's not going to be pretty. On the contrary, if you are using H commands on a memory table, well, it's perfectly possible in your code to have multitask, to have an escape button, put a flag, stop your process, and just ask the user to enter a new query that is more optimized, or even to just display the beginning of the table. So it can be very bad if the query is slow, or if the query returns a big subset of data. If you have a very big subset of data and at the same time you ask for a proportional scroll bar, you are out of luck. Now we're going to have a look at what you can do with a memory object. The speed obviously depends now of your coding. Remember that in a memory table or memory looper, you are basically supposed to load all of the lines in your table at the beginning, so the user will have to wait. There are ways around that problem. You can load only the lines that are visible, then intercept the event on the scroll bar, and when the user asks for the next one, you look in the file and populate the table on the fly. It's perfectly doable. I did it at some point for some project where speed was extremely important. And you can have very, very good results. It's of course much more coding, it's more complex, and basically you are rewriting the file table yourself. You could also display the beginning of the table, then have a secondary thread read the data, put the data in a global string, send a message to the table to have it added to the table on the fly while the recorder is being loaded, and at the same time have multitask in that in order to let the user start do whatever he has to do on the window. All that are possibilities, depend really of what you need. The good thing with these are that this object, being a table or a looper, are extremely versatile. You can do nearly everything with it. It's a display object. You can use that to display a calendar, a project planning, statistical data. Really, nearly everything is doable. It's usable for all complex cases difficult to debug otherwise. By example, you have a very complex query that you have trouble debugging in a SQL syntax. Or you have SQL commands that are not supported in the WinDev access, the data access. I've heard a lot about outer join syntaxes that are not working correctly. Well, all that is doable using a memory table, using H command and all that. Remember that. You have the control. So you can build much more complex functionalities, play on the display, change the color, do every kind of crazy thing, have images in columns, change the image on the fly, have gauge appear in columns, in areas, and so on. It's really the sky is the limit, really, in that aspect. Of course, it's also more complex coding. It's up to you to code what you want to achieve, but it's a very, very, very powerful tool. Remember one thing while we're talking about crazy thing that you want to do in a table. It doesn't matter if it's a file, query, or memory object. If you want to change the display of a line, do it in the line display code. I've seen many people trying to change the display of the line, just changing, by example, the background color depending on the value of a field, have all the customer in green and all the future customer in blue. Well, if you do that when loading the table, in most of the case you're going to be out of luck. First, it's not optimum to do all these kind of changes when loading the table, because most of the time most of the lines won't be displayed, so it's really not optimized. And second, these tables are often creating the line, the row, on the fly when it's needed for the display. So all of your changes are going to be forgotten if you do that anywhere else than in the row display code. And then you have a solution that a lot of people are totally forgetting today. It was at some point in time nearly the only way that we had to do a complex thing. Prepare your data in a temporary file, do all the strange, crazy calculation, works on 20 different files, add things, remove things, and so on. And once the calculation is done, display it in whatever you want. It's a simple display. You do that in a table, in a looper, in whatever you want. But you have separated the problem in two different things. Prepare the data and display it. And if you need to print it after displaying it, well, it's already in the file, so you can very easily also build a report or code it yourself, now that you know how to do it, and work on that new data source. In fact, temporary file is obviously something that is out of style, but still very useful. So the question is, if you are using a query, okay, how are you going to manage your query? Are you going to use an embedded query, an external query, or a hand-coded SQL query? Let's have a look at what are the difference. An embedded query is extremely easy to access from the table looper. It's embedded in the table, in the looper, so you have absolutely no problem. The button is just there, click on it, create it, and you're done. Now, if you want to access it from another window, it can be difficult, if at all possible. The name is based on the table. Is the other window accessible or not? Is the query accessible when the table is not open? And so on and so forth. So compared to that, the external query, the one that you're going to build in the analysis editor, within the exact same window, the query editor is available in the analysis. But if you do that, you're going to give a name to that query, and you're going to be able to use that query as if it was a new file, and you can use that anywhere as a data source. So it's much more universal. It's a little less practical because you have to go in the analysis to design it, but generally when you need a query in a table, there's a very good chance that you're going to need it somewhere else. So reusability of code is true for queries also. If you're going to change it in that window, you're going also probably to have to change it in the other one, and you will have to do that several times, not forget any of them, and so on. So basically, I would say go for the less easy access and the more reusability. That's what I was saying. It can be used anywhere. It's much more easy to use in your code and so on. So it's if you have to use queries, at least I would say use the ones that are universal. Now, SQL hand coding. That's the solution that lots of people are trying to use when the built-in editor doesn't match their need. And it happens quite often, if I can believe the kind of problem that I see on forums. But the question is really, are you a SQL guru? If not, then you're going to depend on the forums to get a solution. And you know, as I know, that answers on forums can take several days of back and forth and testing and this and that to find a solution. So if you're at the point where you cannot use the SQL built-in editor either as embedded or external queries, and you have to code it by hand, and you are not a SQL guru and don't plan to becoming one anytime soon, well, in that case you are probably not using the right option. Perhaps the H syntaxes are more what you need to look at. So, of course, we arrived to the discussion we already had about SQL code versus H syntax code. We are not going to go in all that in details again. I refer you to the first course that we had together. But my opinion, very fast about that. If you have to do simple access to data in a data table, looper, list, or anything like that, you can use the query editor for all this kind of thing. It's perfect. It works very well. If it's complex access, you have speed problem, you have complex create and all this kind of thing, use the H commands. It's easier to debug. You can put in place optimization of the logic of the access, and something that cannot be done automatically by a data engine. And it's easier to build all the crazy stuff that the customer wants us to build.